Friday the 24th of December, 1971. Christmas Eve. The Lockheed L-188A Electra Turboprop, operated by Líneas Aéreas Nacionales Sociedad Anónima, often abbreviated to LANSA, flies directly into a storm. The aircraft starts to be buffeted by extreme turbulence and crackling lightning. The Lockheed begins to break apart in midair, and 17-year-old Juliane Koepcke suddenly finds herself terrifyingly plummeting 10,000 feet, 3,000 meters to the rainforest far below, still strapped to her seat. Koepcke will miraculously survive 11 days alone in the Peruvian Amazon rainforest while suffering from numerous injuries, including a concussion, broken collarbone, deep gashes to her arm and shoulder, and a torn knee ligament. She was the sole survivor of LANSA Flight 508, the deadliest lightning strike disaster in aviation history. A Lockheed L-188A Electra Turboprop, Flight 508 was operated by the Peruvian airline Líneas Aéreas Nacionales Sociedad Anónima, a relatively popular commercial airline located in Lima, Peru. Comprising a fleet of 19 aircraft and offering transport to 11 destinations, LANSA operated numerous Lockheed aircraft. Yet, unnervingly, by 1971, they had already suffered two catastrophic accidents in 1966 and 1970, resulting in 150 fatalities. Seemingly undeterred, at 11:56 p.m. on Friday the 24th of December 1971, Flight 508 departed Lima's Aeropuerto Internacional Jorge Chávez, LIM-SPIM, with the final destination of Aeropuerto Internacional Colonel FAP Francisco Cercada Vineta in Iquitos, Peru. The 1,000-kilometer journey broken up with a stopover at Aeropuerto Internacional Capitán FAP David Abençur Rengifo, PCL, SPCL, in Pucallpa. The Lockheed L-188A was flying as scheduled at around 21,000 feet, 6,400 meters above sea level, until, after 40 minutes in the air, the aircraft entered a mass of thunderstorms and severe turbulence, the airframe audibly juddering as it bucked and dipped in the frightening maelstrom. The flight continued on in this weather for a further 20 minutes, opined by some because its crew were desperately trying to meet the festive holidays flight demands despite the hazardous conditions, until a bright flash of white and crackling bolt of lightning struck the aircraft's right wing, near the two mounted turboprop engine's fuel tanks, sparking a fire. The wing was torn off by the extreme weather and damage wrought by the fire, followed moments later by a large section of the left wing, before the Lockheed L-188A began to tear itself apart in an uncontrollable blazing rage at 21,000 feet. What remained of LANSA Flight 508 slammed into mountainous jungle terrain in Puerto Rico, Peru, a little after 12:45 p.m. Subsequent investigations revealed that Flight 508 crashed due to a complete loss of control. The aircraft experienced structural failure because of the loads meted on the aircraft flying through a severe thunderstorm, but also because of the huge stresses inflicted from the attempted maneuver to level out the aircraft. Of the 91 occupants travelling aboard Flight 508, only one passenger survived the accident, but heart-wrenchingly, it was determined that as many as 14 other passengers likely also survived the crash for as much as 2 to 3 days, but died whilst awaiting rescue, amongst them Juliane's own mother. Born in 1954 to German parents Maria Koepcke and Hans Wilhelm Koepcke, Juliane Koepcke was just 17 years old on Christmas Eve 1971 when she boarded LANSA Flight 508 with her mother, destined to meet Hans Wilhelm at the Panguana Research Station in Peru. The station had been founded as a joint venture between her parents in 1968, both of whom were zoologists. Juliane later described the initial mood aboard the Lockheed as tense, as the flight was already 7 hours late, and this only got worse once the aircraft entered the thunderstorm. Inside the plane, luggage, food and drinks were thrown around the cabin, falling loose from their compartments and hurtling amongst the passengers, and Juliane squeezed her panic-stricken mother's hand. She recalled, "My mother was anxious, but I was okay. I liked flying. Suddenly to the right we saw a bright flash and the plane went into a nosedive. We were headed straight down. Parcels and luggage were falling from the locker. There were gifts, flowers, and Christmas cakes flying around the cabin, and I could hear people cry and weep. Juliane heard her mother say, "That is the end, it's all over." And even amongst the chaos, she noted how calmly Maria Koepcke spoke. Tragically, these were to be the last words she ever heard from her mother. As the aircraft began to fracture in midair, Juliane's seat broke away, with the terrifying teenager still strapped to it, a little under 2 miles above the dense rainforest below. In her own words, Juliane recounted the horrific ordeal. It was pitch black and people were screaming. Then the deep roaring of the engines filled my head completely. Suddenly, there was this amazing silence. The plane was gone, and I must have been unconscious and then came to in midair. I was in a free fall, strapped to my seat bench and hanging head over heels, spinning through the air. I could see the forest spinning sickeningly beneath me. The whispering of the wind was the only noise I could hear then. She awoke around 10 hours later on Christmas Day, having miraculously survived her plummet from 10,000 feet and the crushing impact with the ground. Bewildered and concussed, her first extremely understated thought was, "I survived an air crash." Juliane began calling for her mother, but received no response in return, aside from the native sounds of the rainforest. Despite having survived, she was not without injury, suffering from a broken collarbone, deep gashes to her arm and shoulder, and a torn knee ligament, as well as the concussion. After she'd freed herself from the row of empty seats, she began wandering the jungle, looking in vain for any other survivors, and still largely unsure about what had actually happened. For the next 11 days, Juliane fought against all manner of dangers amongst the rainforest, not least hunger and thirst, managing to survive the initial few days alone off of boiled sweets she had found amongst the wreckage. Survival skills taught to her by Maria and Hans Wilhelm were also vital. With her parents being zoologists, Juliane had accompanied them on numerous excursions into the rainforest, and had even spent around a year and a half at the Panguana research station, unknowingly located around 30 miles from the crash site. This also meant she was familiar with much of the native flora and fauna, decisive life or death knowledge in any survival situation. Juliane recalled being able to hear the search and rescue planes overhead, but due to the thick canopy was unable to signal them. Wearing only a very short, sleeveless mini dress, she struggled with the grueling temperature of the rainforest. During the day, the climate was oppressively hot and wet, but in the night, the temperature rapidly dropped. With only one sandal and having lost her glasses during the crash, Juliane used the shoe to test the ground ahead of her, wary of snakes or insects hidden on the jungle floor, as she was extremely short-sighted. In a particularly frightening experience, she heard the sound of a king vulture, which unnerved her, as she knew that they only landed when there was carrion nearby. It wasn't long before she came face to face with what had attracted the vulture's attention: a row of seats with 3 passengers still strapped in, buried headfirst into the earth as deep as 2 feet. Whilst naturally this sight horrified the young Juliane, she was also concerned that one of them could have been her mother. But after seeing the woman's painted toenails, something she knew her mother never did, Juliane felt relieved, but quickly also guilty at her morbid relief. By the 10th day, Juliane was barely able to stand and instead began to drift along the edge of a large river, passing crocodiles on the bank who watched her eerily, some even slithering into the water to follow her. At some point she discovered a man-made shelter and found with it a petrol canister, and recalling watching her father use petrol in the past to clean the wound of a family pet, decided to attempt this. The exposed wounds on her body had rapidly become infected in the grimy, humid climate, and the following quote isn't for the faint-hearted. "I had a cut on my arm, and after a few days I could feel there was something in it. I took a look, and a fly had laid her eggs in the hole. It was full of maggots, and I was afraid I would lose my arm. As I cleansed with petrol, the maggots attempted to crawl deeper into the wound, and I plucked some of the centimetre-long parasites out by a hand. Later, after I was rescued and it was medically treated, more than 50 maggots were found inside. I still wonder how so many could have fitted into that little hole. It was no bigger than a €1 coin." Sometime following her ad hoc clinical practice, Juliane fell asleep at the shelter, and it soon transpired that the site was not abandoned after all. The following morning, workers returned to the camp and discovered Juliane, stunned to find her there and believing she could be some kind of local legend. A water goddess who is said to be a part blonde, white-skinned woman and part water dolphin. Describing hearing their voices as like the voices of angels, Juliane was able to speak some Spanish, which she had learnt from her parents, and so was able to communicate with her rescuers. After assisting with her wounds and offering food, they arranged to transport her to a nearby village by canoe, from where she was airlifted to hospital to receive professional treatment for her injuries and to be reunited with her grief-stricken father. So weak that she was unable to speak to him, the pair just held each other, hopeful that Maria had also somehow survived. However, it was soon confirmed that she had also passed away, along with the other 90 lost souls. After recovering in a Peruvian hospital for a while, Juliane assisted search and rescue teams to locate the crash site and to recover the bodies of fellow passengers and crew of LANSA Flight 508. In 1989, Juliane married Eric Diller, a fellow scientist, and eventually fulfilled her parents' legacy at the Panguana Research Station as its director, and in 2011 wrote the memoir When I Fell from the Sky, which was also adapted into a film. In a curious series of events, visionary director Werner Herzog approached Juliane to share his own connection to Flight 508. In 1971, Herzog had been scouting locations for his new film, due to be released the following year, called Aguirre, The Wrath of God, and had booked to be aboard the flight. However, a last-minute schedule change resulted in him missing its departure. In 1998, Juliane accompanied the German filmmaker to the crash site, in doing so returning for the first time to that so somber grave, since she'd guided the search teams there 27 years before. The fate of LANSA Flight 508 remains one of the most tragic and astonishing events in aviation history, but it is also a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, through Juliane's survival against all odds, overcoming injury, infection, exhaustion, fear, and grief. Had she not had been the sole survivor, it is difficult to imagine the wreckage of Flight 508 having ever been found.